Hey, Michael Church, Crawl Space Ninja, and today we're going to talk about the 5 major enemies of the crawl space that every homeowner needs to be aware of and address. Stay tuned. So in our business, the #1 enemy that we come across is high humidity, okay? High humidity has to be addressed. And I know there's a lot of information out there that you can ventilate and that you can, open up an AC vent in the crawl space and all this other stuff. And all those things may work given certain circumstances, but the best way we have found to address high humidity on a continuous basis is with a dehumidifier. Now keep in mind that some of the high humidity comes from different places. You've got high humidity that comes in from the outside. Okay, so that's one source of high humidity. If you have a plumbing leak that is causing the wood inside the crawl space or the fiberglass that you've got up in the floor joist to get wet, those two things, the plumbing leak along with the wood and the fiberglass, can give off high humidity. So as they give off the moisture as they dry out, they're adding to the humidity problem. Plus that outside humidity can be absorbed by the insulation and the floor joist and then add high humidity from the insulation and the floor joist. Maybe in the winter time when the crawl space starts drying out. Another place for high humidity is also from standing water. So if you've got a foundation leak or something like that where your crawl space is flooding, that's also adding humidity to the crawl space. So that's enemy #1 is high humidity. Enemy #2 that we find in the crawl space is standing water or hydrostatic pressure that comes through the foundation walls. Now, the reason why they are a problem is because they can potentially cause structural damage if you've got a lot of water movement or floating, moving a lot of soil. It can also raise the vapor barrier and then uncover the earth so that the earth is adding humidity to the crawl space. The biggest problem is that standing water causes high humidity. So you've got to address that standing water, and typically the best way to address standing water, you can try to do it from the outside with either a French drain or making sure the downspouts are properly taking water away from the foundation of the house. But remember, once water starts coming in the crawl space, once it's made that penetration through the foundation wall, and that can be through a mortar joint that has been pushed on, and now it's broken all that mortar out of the cinder block. Once that water starts to come in, one of the best and easiest ways to fix a crawl space water problem is with a trench and a sump pump. There's different theories on how to trench and different products out there to use, but you basically got to give the water a place to go. So if you've got standing water coming into the crawl space, you need to have some form of French drain installed inside the crawl space that'll lead to a sump pump that'll push that water back out of the crawl space so it does not become a humidity problem. All right, enemy #3 of the crawl space is going to be mold or fungus. Now remember, we've been talking about standing water, we've been talking about high humidity, but normally those things lead to some kind of mold or fungus problem. Now there's different names for it out there. There's mildew, there's wood rot fungus, there's mold. Oh no, don't say the M word, you'll ruin my real estate deal. Well, the fact is that mold is mold and all of it is some type of fungus. So what you've got to do is you've got to address that properly. Never let anyone address a mold problem without first lowering the humidity, drying out the structure, removing the mold and or applying a disinfectant, and maybe even going as far as to put a protectant on the wood to keep it from growing mold in the future, as well as keeping that dehumidifier in there in the crawl space to control humidity all year long. So some of the ways you get mold obviously is plumbing leaks, high humidity, things like that. And there's different products out there that you can use to disinfect the mold. We like the Anabec products. The cleaner and the X70 along with soda blasting is a great way to visibly remove the mold as well as disinfect and protect. So if you've got a mold problem in your crawl space, you want to make sure that you get somebody to address it that knows what they're doing. If you're planning on taking on that project by yourself, make sure you wear proper proper protective equipment, goggles, and different things like that to protect yourself, because even just pulling the insulation out to address the mold problem can be hazardous to your health. The fourth enemy that we find in many crawl spaces, and probably one of the most overlooked by crawl space professionals, is insulation. Why does no one want to put insulation in the crawl space? It's like, according to the energy people, energy.gov, it's the #2 place that you should insulate your home, second to the attic. And I'm not talking about just throwing fiberglass up in there. You need to air seal the subfloor, because the better the subfloor is air sealed, those little penetrations where they were building your house and they were putting a plumbing or an electrical outlet or an HVAC duct, you want to make sure you air seal those things really well. Then you want to make sure you address the insulation problem. If you've got an open or vented crawl space, you need to have some kind of floor joist insulation. If you decide to encapsulate, you can either go with a floor joist insulation, or you can insulate the walls of the crawl space, and that way you're keeping the hot and the cold from even entering the crawl space by creating a thermal barrier on the walls of the crawl space. Now, we prefer that method. We think it's a better method. Plus, the foam board we use is termite resistant, and if it ever gets wet, it's designed for ground contact, so it doesn't matter if it gets wet or not. If rock wool or fiberglass insulation gets wet, typically you're supposed to remove and replace that insulation. But never, ever, ever encapsulate or fix your crawl space or do any kind of crawl space repair on a whole level without insulating it properly. Okay, enemy number 5 is what we call soil gases. Now, these gases can be anything from radon to methane to VOCs or different things like that. Now, if your crawl space is a vented crawl space, you probably don't have a soil gas problem because your windows are open in the crawl space, all right? Now, I know they make these louvered vents that open in the summer and close in the winter and all that kind of stuff, but they're still not really air sealed. So they still allow air to flow in and out of the crawl space pretty regularly. But if you encapsulate the crawl space according to the Environmental Protection Agency, you're supposed to move 1 cubic feet per minute of air for every 50 square feet of crawl space out. Because if you don't do that, let's say you decide to hire somebody that just installs a dehumidifier. Well, believe it or not, we've actually seen companies install a dehumidifier and not seal the vents, so that way they're dehumidifying the whole neighborhood. Okay, so you want to seal the vents to slow that humidity down so that the dehumidifier can shut off and rest and then come back on. But you also want to make sure that you properly ventilate the crawl space to move those soil gases out. So you don't want to control a humidity problem and create a radon problem. So make sure that you address enemy number 5, the soil gas problem that most crawl spaces will have if they're encapsulated. Okay, so I appreciate you watching this video about the 5 enemies of the crawl space, and I just want to give you one bonus enemy, and that enemy is your procrastination. If you decide not to fix the crawl space or to wait for someone cheaper or whatever, remember, things don't go down in price. Typically, things go up in price. So if you've got an encapsulation quote 2 years ago, chances are it's more expensive today than it was 2 years ago. So I encourage you, please fix your crawl space promptly and make sure you do it by a professional that knows what they're doing. I'm Michael Church with Crawl Space Ninja, and I hope you make it a happy and blessed day. We'll see you later.